Hello everyone, my name is Schrader. I'm a SharePoint Solutions Architect at 6th Street Consulting, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about the SharePoint Health Check. The SharePoint Health Check is a product 6th Street Consulting offers to help assess how well your SharePoint 2010 and SharePoint 2013 environments are performing. We identify common issues with SharePoint environments as well as recommendations on how to fix those issues. This can provide insight on how well your applications are performing, as well as any user adoption issues or any other critical things that might arise when a SharePoint environment is not functioning properly. There's quite a large list of things we look at when performing a SharePoint Health Check, and today I want to talk a little bit about a few of the common things that we find with SharePoint Health Checks that maybe you can look for in your SharePoint environments. We will also go over today ways that these common issues are resolved. The typical SharePoint Health Check takes anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks. This is for hosted versions of SharePoint, either running on-premises or in Windows Azure. This is a really good way for companies to see how well their SharePoint farm is performing and if there's any issues that can be resolved. Once the SharePoint Health Check is complete, we provide a high-level report as well as a detailed recommendation of how to fix issues within your SharePoint environment. There are a few common issues that are found in SharePoint environments when performing a health check. One of the common issues found when performing a SharePoint health check is that the user profile synchronization service is not completing correctly and failing. This can be because of incorrect permissions on the Active Directory sync account, or that the SharePoint sync service has stopped within SharePoint. When the user profiles are not correctly syncing information from your Active Directory to SharePoint, applications inside of SharePoint have stale data. It is not uncommon that your applications inside of SharePoint rely on this user profile data for user information. Having stale information in these applications can lead to user adoption as well as other issues. Another commonly found issue when performing a SharePoint health check is that the SharePoint search service is failing to index successfully. When this happens, your applications don't surface all the results or the latest results to your data. There are also numerous SharePoint Server as well as SQL Server performance issues. Another common issue is outages of SharePoint. Things such as backups or other services might be offline at different hours of the day and provide recommendations of how to address those issues. Who is the SharePoint Health Check for? This is for any company that might have an intranet, a ticket system, KPI dashboards, or any other business process that heavily depends on SharePoint to surface that information. Common scenarios of SharePoint applications include document management solutions, collaboration, custom applications hosted on top of SharePoint, and as well as many others. On the right side of your screen, you can see our internal 6SC SharePoint intranet. This intranet has information about KPIs and other business critical processes that exist internally as well as with our clients. If this dashboard were to go down, this would mean we would lose insight as to how well our environment as well as our client environments are performing. SharePoint is mission critical for us, and so we have to make sure that it's healthy and always running to perform 100%. Consider what a SharePoint outage might be in your organization. What applications would be impacted? Can you afford the downtime? A SharePoint health check might proactively find any issues ahead of time before users find them. What makes a SharePoint environment healthy? Here are a few of the pass criteria for our SharePoint health check. The first thing we look for is that the farm was set up or configured using Microsoft best practices. This can be anything from the least privileged security install to other commonly known best practices. We verify that SharePoint is up to date, making sure that you have the latest patches so your environment is secure and stable, as well as the patching was completed 100% successfully and all of your databases are up to date. We like to make sure that search results are accurate, so when users perform searches, they get the results they're expecting. We make sure that user profile information is up to date with the latest user information from Active Directory, so that your applications can surface the correct information to users. We verify that your farm is in agreement with your service level agreement, or SLA, such as uptime or other measurements, making sure your SharePoint farm has sufficient disk space on your primary drive as well as your data drives. We verify that Windows services are running without any issues and configured properly. Next, I would like to talk a little bit about when you should perform a SharePoint Health Check and why you should perform a SharePoint Health Check. It's not uncommon in the SharePoint community to hear that SharePoint is slow, or there's issues with applications or unknown errors. When users have this type of experience, it can really decrease user adoption of your applications. When releasing new applications or supporting legacy applications, users do not want to see a slow performing SharePoint environment. They want something that is quick and reliable. Maybe the SharePoint environment was set up correctly, but the requirements have changed, such as SharePoint was originally set up as a proof of concept or POC and later became a production environment. Also, due to user growth, the SharePoint platform may no longer be optimal for hosting that many users, and you may need to add more servers. These are all reasons why SharePoint might not be performing well or have issues. By performing a SharePoint Health Check, we will provide a recommendation of how these issues can be addressed, such as adding more servers or configuring best practices within your environment so that the applications are responsive in a timely fashion for users. On the right side of your screen, you can see an example of just one element on a page taking 8 seconds to load. A typical complete page load time should be anywhere from 3 to 5 seconds. This page has performance issues. There are many reasons that can lead up to an application's large page load times, but performing a health check can eliminate most of those issues so that you can focus on having an application that performs well. There are many factors that contribute to a large page load time. When performing a SharePoint Health Check, we eliminate most of those factors so that your environment can be corrected and optimized. Here's a high-level summary of how the SharePoint Health Check works. First, we work with your team to identify what are your goals of performing a SharePoint Health Check. Do you have any specific applications that are slow, are backups failing, or any other reasons why you would like to perform a SharePoint Health Check? Common reasons for performing a SharePoint Health Check are a slow performance of an environment, or you're preparing for upgrade or migration in the future. Next, we perform a SharePoint audit. We also audit the operating system, SQL Server, and compare how these were set up in accordance with Microsoft's best practices. Once the audit is complete, we compile a checklist as well as a detailed recommendation of how to resolve any issues we find with your environment. The checklist is a simple single-page report that has a pass-fail for each of the criteria. This single-page report is very good for executives and other members of the team that want to see how well the SharePoint environment is performing. Once the checklist and detailed recommendation are complete, we will meet with your team to go over this high-level checklist as well as the details of how to correct these issues. During this time, any questions can be asked about why the particular issue may have occurred or why we recommended the current approach to resolving the issue. A good example of a client we've had in the past where we've identified a risk and business impact is around search. The client heavily relied on search for surfacing information about documents to users. The search service had major issues and was not performing well because of the topology of the search service. Our recommendation was that the search service was split out onto multiple servers that they had intended search to be running on. This was a higher business impact for them because of the needs of their applications. The results of the SharePoint Health Check can be custom catered to your company. A few of the documents that we deliver at the end of the health check include a high-level overview, a one-page assessment scorecard, a risk analysis if the issues were not to be mitigated, as well as the business impact if those issues were not mitigated. And we provide recommendations on how to resolve these issues. Then we summarize a conclusion about what our overall experience was when performing the SharePoint Health Check in your environment. This information can provide very valuable insight on where you might go next to resolve these issues. Many clients, once the results have been presented to them, will begin mitigating the issues themselves, as well as reaching out for help and assistance to mitigate other issues that are of high profile. Some of the greatest areas of improvement or opportunity we've seen with performing a SharePoint Health Check are listed here on this slide. Here are a few of the major areas of opportunity we've found after performing a SharePoint Health Check. We've seen SharePoint environments that have excessive list view thresholds set, so that their applications can perform outside of the software performance boundaries that Microsoft has set. When this happens, you're allowing applications on hardware that might not be able to support those types of large queries to take place. When these applications are operating outside the software boundaries of Microsoft, you see very large queries taking place inside a SQL server that are over seconds long that can really be a bottleneck for applications. Once the queries are complete on the SQL server, the applications still have to render the page and present that back to the user. This can result in 10-second or longer page loads. We identify this as a place of great improvement for your applications. Of course, greater insight is needed on why the applications were designed that way, but we do see this as a major area of opportunity. One of the simplest solutions we've seen with the list view threshold operating outside of the performance boundaries is with a simple SharePoint list that had a count column. This count column would iterate over 5,000 items and take quite a long time in SQL to complete. Once this count was removed on the list view, the application started performing within typical page load times under a few seconds. Another common issue is that the SQL Server max memory was set to the SQL Server's old RAM amount, which was 7 gigabytes for 8 gigs of RAM to leave overhead for the operating system and as well as other applications. But they later upgraded to 28 gigabytes of RAM. The throttling of the SQL Server was never increased when they added more RAM to improve the SQL Server's performance. SQL was not utilizing all that extra 21 gigs of RAM that was added to the server. Once the max memory was increased, SQL could use and cache its queries more optimally, providing better user experience. Another area of opportunities was SQL maintenance plans. Administrative alerts were not configured, so when backups were failing, no administrator was getting the email that the backups were not successful. It is not uncommon to see SharePoint environments that have patching or upgrade failures or that are incomplete. This could be as simple as running the products and configuration wizard once again on each of the SharePoint servers, or running a few commands in PowerShell to upgrade the databases. Once all the databases are up to date, your SharePoint patching is complete. There are also issues with legacy alternate access mappings left behind, or old IIS configurations. Some of these settings don't provide a purpose and may cause conflicts, and they can be removed easily without any harm to the applications. I hope that any SharePoint administrators or users on today's webinar can see opportunity where SharePoint Health Check might benefit their company or their SharePoint environment. These benefits can be anywhere around performance issues or any symptoms you may have seen. If you're a SharePoint administrator, remember not only to focus on SharePoint or your applications, but on SQL Server and the operating system as a whole. If you have issues in your SharePoint environment, rank them by risk or business impact to decide on which ones to solve first, and make sure they fall within Microsoft's best practices. One of the greatest things about the SharePoint Health Check is that we don't actually make changes to your environment, so this can be done during business hours. We go into your SharePoint environment and document and analyze any issues that we see, and we provide back recommendations on how to address those issues. Thank you for attending today's webinar on the SharePoint Health Check. I hope that everyone has learned a little bit more about assessing a SharePoint environment's health, as well as any performance issues that might arise from an administrator point of view or from a user point of view on your applications. If you see any of these errors, let your administrator know so that they can correct these issues or seek outside help on resolving them. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat window. David and I will be answering any specific questions you might have around the SharePoint Health Check or SharePoint performance issues. I would like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. Thank you very much, and that concludes today's session.